David turned 59 last fall. He didn't throw a party, no loud dinners, no toasts, no candles. Instead, he sat by his window at 5:37 p.m., same chair, same coffee, same silence. Across the street, a couple argued over groceries. The man looked tired. The woman was louder than the traffic. David didn't flinch. He just sipped slowly. They say he's been single too long. That something must be wrong. But what they don't know is that while others filled their homes with noise, David filled his mind with clarity. While they chased validation, he chased discipline. And while they begged to be seen, he chose to disappear on purpose. You see, the longer a man is single, the more dangerous he becomes. Not because he's bitter, not because he hates love, but because he finally understands what it costs to give yourself away too easily. David's not cold. He's just been through enough storms to know the difference between comfort and chaos. And now, he doesn't chase, doesn't impress, doesn't bend. Because solitude didn't shrink him. It built him, and that kind of man, the one who has nothing to prove and no one to please, is the kind of man this world can't control. Let me tell you what happened to David, and why men like him, men who walk alone, become sharper, calmer, and yes, more dangerous with time. 1. He no longer seeks validation. There was a time when David couldn't stand silence. It wasn't the kind of silence you enjoy with a good book or soft jazz playing in the background. It was the kind that echoes, the kind that makes you question everything. After his divorce, the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like punishment, a daily reminder that he had failed, not just as a husband, but as a man, as a father, as a provider. He kept reaching, kept texting people who barely responded, kept showing up to events where he felt invisible, kept trying to matter again. To someone. Anyone. But the truth is, when you spend years bending yourself backwards for people who never once turn around to meet you halfway, something inside you eventually breaks. And then, something else begins. David stopped asking, stopped checking his phone for replies that never came, stopped wondering if someone thought he was doing okay. Right? Because when a man stops chasing applause, something powerful happens. He starts listening to himself. And that voice, the one he had buried under years of pretending to be enough, it got louder, clearer, steadier. David no longer needs a woman to tell him he's strong. He doesn't need a crowd to clap when he enters a room. He doesn't post to be praised, doesn't dress to be noticed. Because he knows now the hardest earned validation is the kind no one ever sees. It's quiet. It's the decision to say no to a weekend trip that would drain him. It's the strength to stay home alone with a book rather than force a smile at a dinner he never wanted to attend. It's that deep breath he takes when someone tries to provoke him and he chooses not to react. These days, David doesn't need recognition to feel worthy. He recognizes himself, and the longer he stayed single, the less he needed to perform. No more rehearsed lines. No more trying to be the perfect man for someone who didn't even know how to love him back. And slowly, the applause that once kept him alive started to sound like noise. Now, he nods to himself in the mirror each morning, not because he's arrogant, but because the man looking back has survived storms no one knows about, and walked away from lies that nearly cost him his soul. He isn't looking to be clapped for anymore. He's looking to stay centered, and that kind of man, the one who no longer asks to be chosen, is dangerous, because he can't be manipulated by guilt. He can't be swayed by compliments. He can't be bought with praise, or broken by absence. He walks in truth now, and truth doesn't need permission. It doesn't perform. It doesn't beg. It simply stands, and a man who stands alone at peace, without permission, isn't broken. He's free, and freedom is terrifying to people who still need approval to feel alive. That's why the longer David has been single, the more dangerous he's become. Not to others, but to everything that once tried to own him. 2. He becomes a master observer. David used to talk too much, not because he loved the sound of his own voice, but because he thought that if he explained himself just right, if he found the perfect words, the perfect tone, maybe they'd understand him. He wanted to be seen, to be heard, to be understood without having to raise his voice. So he explained. He justified. He overshared, over-apologized, overcorrected. But the truth is, When someone doesn't want to understand you, no amount of words will make them listen. And over time, David learned silence speaks louder than explanations ever will. These days, he lets people talk. While they try to impress, or justify, or charm, he watches. He watches their hands, their breathing, the hesitation before they answer. He notices who changes the subject when you get too close to the truth, who avoids responsibility by joking, who flatters too fast and disappears just as quick. He's no longer reacting, because solitude didn't just quiet him, it sharpened him. You see, when a man is no longer trying to entertain, he starts to observe, and the longer he watches, the more he sees. He catches patterns most people miss. The woman who flirts to test control, the man who always shows up when he needs something but vanishes when you do, the friend who listens only to use your pain as conversation somewhere else. David doesn't get angry anymore. He doesn't confront, doesn't argue, doesn't demand clarity. He just observes, because solitude taught him something simple and brutal. Most people reveal themselves if you stop interrupting them, and when you no longer rush to fill the silence, the masks around you start to slip. David's learned that the loudest people often hide the most fear. The most charming ones, usually the loneliest, and those who demand your loyalty the quickest, are often the first to betray it. But none of that surprises him anymore, because now David knows true strength isn't in knowing everything. It's in watching and waiting. He doesn't speak to be heard. He speaks when it matters, and when it doesn't, he stays quiet. Because not everyone deserves a reaction. Not every question deserves an answer. Not every insult deserves your peace. Some things are best handled by doing nothing and letting time expose the truth. And that's what makes David dangerous now. Not that he's trying to outsmart anyone. Not that he manipulates or plays games. But that he can no longer be manipulated. He sees too clearly. And a man who sees clearly moves carefully. Moves with purpose. Moves without needing applause, validation, or revenge. Just clarity. And that kind of man, you can't distract him with beauty. You can't fool him with charm. And you sure as hell can't control him with guilt. He doesn't speak much these days, but when he does, you'll know he's already seen everything you didn't say. 3. He finds power in solitude. At first, solitude felt like punishment. After the divorce, after the silence settled in, David thought he was just being forgotten, like a man who once mattered, and then didn't. The house got too quiet, the evenings too long, and the mornings, the hardest part. No footsteps, no good morning, just stillness, and coffee for one. He used to turn on the television just for background noise, scroll through social media just to feel less alone, text people he didn't even enjoy being around just to avoid feeling invisible. But something shifted, not suddenly, not with some grand realization, but slowly, like fog lifting from a road he didn't know he was on. It started on a Sunday. He cancelled plans with people who drained him. He stayed home, and for once, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt honest. There were no games to play, no masks to wear, no one to impress. Just him, and the sound of his own thoughts finally uncluttered. That night, he made dinner. For himself. Not some microwave meal. A real one. He played jazz instead of scrolling, read pages instead of timelines, and for the first time in years, he slept through the night without needing anyone's warmth beside him. That's when he began to realize solitude wasn't a curse. It was a classroom, and the more time he spent in it, the more he started learning who he really was when no one else was watching. He remembered what made him laugh without anyone needing to laugh back. He rediscovered the joy of walking without a destination, of eating slow, of praying out loud. He didn't need a woman to complete the day. He didn't need noise to avoid reflection. He was starting to come home, to himself. And that kind of solitude, that's not loneliness. That's alignment. These days, David wakes up before the sun. He journals with his coffee. He lifts weights not for vanity, but for discipline. He talks to God in the quiet without needing answers, just presence. And when people ask, "Don't you get lonely?" he smiles softly and says, "Lonely is needing someone to feel full. I don't need anyone. I enjoy them, but I don't need them." Because when you find peace in your own company, you stop tolerating chaos in others. You no longer chase connection for survival. You seek connection only if it honors the peace you've built. And that's what makes David dangerous now. He doesn't enter relationships hoping to be filled. He enters full overflowing with purpose, clarity, direction, and if she doesn't match that frequency, he walks, not angrily, not bitter, just quietly, because solitude is no longer something he fears losing. It's something he refuses to trade. And that's what makes a man like David untouchable. He's not afraid of being alone anymore. He's afraid of losing himself again for someone who doesn't see the value in staying. And so, he stays with himself. Not because he has no options, but because he finally realized being alone is not the absence of love, it's the presence of peace. 4. He detaches from the chase. There was a time David believed pursuit was the same as love. He thought if he showed up enough, stayed consistent enough, proved his loyalty loud enough, someone would stay. He brought flowers, wrote little notes, paid attention to things others missed. He gave without keeping score, and for a while it worked, until he noticed something. The more he gave, the less it mattered. The more available he became, the more invisible he felt. It confused him. How could loving harder make her colder? Why did his consistency become something she expected, but no longer respected? He started to notice a pattern. At first, it was affection, then comfort, then control. And somewhere in between, David became something she didn't have to earn anymore. Just something she used to feel secure. That realization hit harder than any breakup, because it wasn't just her. It was the world. The world taught him that men should pursue, always, initiate, prove, provide, persist. But no one ever asked the deeper question. What does it cost a man to constantly chase someone who never meets him halfway? David doesn't chase anymore. Not because he's angry, not because he's bitter, but because he finally understood what's meant for him won't require him to beg. These days, he lets things unfold. He doesn't reach out first unless he feels led. He doesn't try to win someone over. He watches, he listens, he waits. Because he knows now real connection is mutual, calm, easy in its beginning, steady in its deepening. There's no need for fireworks, just peace. And if she isn't aligned with that peace, he lets her pass. Like a train that wasn't meant to stop at his station. Because David's not chasing her anymore. He's chasing God, chasing silence that heals, chasing purpose that grounds, chasing truth that doesn't flirt and fade. He no longer needs someone to complete his story. He's already living the part where he's whole. And wholeness doesn't chase. It chooses. It waits for what's right, and walks away from what's not. The world sees this kind of man and calls him cold. But the truth is, he's just clear. He knows what it cost him the last time he ran after someone who wasn't ready. He remembers the nights he stayed up, overthinking her silence. The days he worked harder hoping she'd notice the effort. The years he lost, thinking love was about proving, not receiving. Never again. David doesn't chase. He aligns. And if a woman doesn't bring peace, depth, truth and presence, he won't fight for her attention. He'll protect his peace instead. That's what makes him dangerous now. You can't bait him with beauty. You can't shake him with silence. And you can't trap him with guilt. He's not running after love anymore. He's walking toward purpose. And if love wants to join him on that road, it'll have to keep up. 5. He aligns with a higher calling. David used to think life was about milestones. Marriage, career, retirement, a house with a yard and someone to grow old with. He did it all. Checked every box. And still, something felt off. After the divorce, when the noise faded and the house was finally quiet, David was forced to face a question he had avoided for years. If I'm not a husband, not a provider, then who am I? For months, he didn't have an answer. He tried filling the silence with hobbies, travel, even new dates. But nothing settled him, because none of it pointed him to meaning. That's when he started walking early in the mornings. Not for fitness, but for stillness. No phone, no destination, just quiet feet on cold pavement, and a soul that was finally willing to listen. And in that silence, he met someone he had forgotten. Himself. But more than that, he met the presence. That gentle, subtle voice that doesn't shout, doesn't push, just waits. He stopped asking, "Why did she leave?" and started asking, "What is God doing in me?" He stopped praying for someone to come fix the loneliness, and started asking to become the man who no longer fears it. He began aligning. Not chasing, not forcing, aligning. His calendar got simpler, his habits more focused, his words fewer but deeper. His money didn't go to impressing anyone anymore. It went to what matters. He started giving more quietly, serving more without recognition. And the strangest thing? The more he let go of needing a title, the more he stepped into his true role. A man of order, of strength, of vision. Not because a woman affirmed it, but because his creator did. You see, David stopped chasing happiness and started honoring obedience. He stopped asking, "What do I want?" and started asking, "What have I been assigned to build?" And that question changed everything. He no longer seeks comfort as the highest goal. He seeks clarity. He no longer dates to be seen. He builds to be remembered. And if someone joins the mission, great. But he's no longer pausing his purpose to be picked. That's what makes him dangerous now. Not that he's untouchable, but that he's no longer aimless. He walks slower but straighter. He talks less, but with more weight. He forgives quicker, but never forgets what peace cost him. And the world? It doesn't know what to do with a man who no longer needs its approval, because he walks with a higher one. David's not trying to become anyone's dream anymore. He's trying to honor the one who never left him in the dark. And from that place, he leads. In truth, in stillness, in power. Because the man who aligns with heaven no longer kneels for attention. He builds. He watches. He waits. And when the time comes, he welcomes the woman who doesn't distract him from purpose, but walks beside it. So now, when David walks by the window at dusk, he doesn't envy the couples anymore. He blesses them quietly and returns to his solitude. Because the longer he stayed single, the more peace he's found. And the more peace he's found, the less he's willing to lose it for anyone who doesn't bring the same. They whisper that he's too alone. Oh, but what they don't understand is this. He's not alone. He's aligned. He's not bitter. He's clear. He's not cold. He's calibrated. The longer a man is single, the more dangerous he becomes, not because he wants to hurt, but because he finally refuses to be hurt again by his own silence, his own overgiving, his own forgetting. And that kind of man can't be rushed, can't be impressed, can't be played. He's not here to be liked. He's here to be whole. And if you ask him if he's lonely, he'll just smile and say, "Peace is never lonely."